the scripture today, is Luke 15. It's the parable of the prodigal son in the Message translation. By this time, a lot of men and women of questionable reputation were hanging around Jesus, listening intently. The Pharisees and religion scholars were not pleased, not at all pleased. They growled. He takes in sinners and eats meals with them, treating them like old friends. Their grumbling triggered a story. There once was a man who had 2 sons. The younger said to his father, "Father, I want right now what's coming to me." So the father divided the property between them. It wasn't long before the younger son packed his bags and left for a distant country. There, undisciplined and dissipated, he wasted everything he had. After he'd gone through all of his money, there was a bad famine all throughout that country, and he began to feel it. He signed on with a citizen there who assigned him to his fields to slop the pigs. He was so hungry, he would have eaten the corn cobs and the pig slop, but no one would give him any. That brought him to his senses. He said, "All those farmhands working for my father sit down to 3 meals a day, and here I am starving to death. I'm going back to my father, and I'll say to him, 'Father, I've sinned against God. I've sinned before you. I don't deserve to be called your son. Take me on as a hired hand.'" He got right up and went home to his father. When he was a long way off, his father saw him, his heart pounding. He ran out, embraced him, and kissed him. And the son started his speech. "Father, I've sinned against God. I've sinned before you. I don't deserve to be called your son ever again." The father wasn't listening. He was calling to the servants, "Quick, bring a clean set of clothes and dress him. Put the family ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Then get a prize-winning heifer and roast it. We're going to feast. We're going to have a wonderful time. My son is here, given up for dead and now alive, given up for lost and now found." And they began to have a wonderful time. The word of the Lord. As most of you know, Ralph and I just spent the last 11 days traveling around Europe on a river cruise, visiting 4 countries: the Netherlands, Germany, France, and Switzerland. Here are a few pictures. That's a canal in Amsterdam. A castle, of course. Okay. While we were in each country, we tried to adapt and to blend into the culture we were immersed in. Yet we recognized it was quite difficult to blend in with a crowd when you're wearing ship-distributed earpieces and these little baubles that attach to your coats, identifying you as a boatie, right? So when we had our free time in the villages, in the cities, away from our guides, we tucked our devices away, and we tried to assimilate the best we could. We wanted to understand what made these unique places home to the people who lived in them. And here are the things that we learned. The concept of home is quite different for every culture. Home could mean a small village where you and your family have lived for generations. Home could mean a large city. You have a very small flat for a lot of money and spend most of your time outdoors with friends and family because your flat is so small and there's no money for parking or cars, so you ride bicycles. Most of the places that we visited that the buses and the boats bring you to are touristy kind of spots. The boats take you to those most interesting touristy spots they can find, often transporting you an hour away from the river by bus to get to a destination. But when we had free time in the villages, we did 3 things. The first thing was to go to a supermarket, or a corner market if there was one. Seeing where people shop and watching what they buy gave us a window into their lives. We also noticed what type of products they had on the shelves and what the prices were. We're constantly converting euros to US dollars in our heads. We purchased at least one item in every grocery store each time. But checkout was quite difficult, as they were often all automated and often in German. And so we never hesitated to ask for help. I mean, we didn't. The thing to remember is that we were the visitors to their home. We were the outsiders, so we were the ones who needed to be gracious. And sometimes we were viewed as outsiders and a bit of a nuisance, and other times people saw us as pilgrims and were very, very helpful. The second thing we did was to walk away from the city centers. The centers had all of the tourist kiosks with souvenirs and such. I mean, this was in every single city center. And as you walked away from the center, you'd see more of regular life in the towns. In one town, we saw a wedding happening. It was so lovely. It was wonderful. Off the beaten path, we saw schools and bus stops and more regular type coffee shops and restaurants for the locals. We got to see the place that the residents called home. The third thing we did, which was interesting, was to visit pharmacies. Now, I had developed a cough, and then Ralph developed a cold, so I was grateful to be able to learn the system. The pharmacies in this part of Europe were more like an old-fashioned grocery market, or when Ralph was a child, it was like this. You went up to the counter to make your purchase, and they'd select it from behind them. This was nothing like a Walgreens, friends, okay, at all. But getting a medical appointment can take weeks or months and months in Europe. So they've developed a system where the pharmacy staff seem to be trained as medics. They asked me very specific questions about my cough, how I was feeling, before they dispensed medication. This, to me, was another example of their home. The pharmacy staff could get to know you as a villager and what your needs were. It was an intimate way of doing business, and I could see why the people living there called these villages home. There was a connection, a very defined community awareness. We learned on our trip that the word home is very subjective. In our scriptures today, the prodigal son leaves home with his demanded inheritance. We see him right away as selfish and foolishly arrogant. He gave up his home for perceived bigger and better things. He squanders his inheritance and ends up with nothing left. He's in a famine and he's starving. In utter despair, he decides enough is enough. He's been foolish to leave home, would return to his father and beg for forgiveness and penance and accept a new fate of no longer a son, but instead a servant. To his great surprise, his father greets him with love and delight. The son who was lost is now home. He was immediately accepted for who he was, absolutely who he was, a little foolish, but beloved. He had come home. And God, our Father, welcomes us home after we have gone astray. God, our Father, celebrates every time we come home to him. When we arrived on board our little ship, we had a very warm welcome. We were encouraged to unpack all of our bags, use the closet and the drawers, and putting our empty suitcases under the bed, so we never saw them again. This made us feel at home. When we left an excursion, they did not say we'd be going back to the ship. No. They said we would be finding our way home. That was very interesting, helping us to find home away from home. All the staff did the best to learn our names right away. The first night, we were named, and in being named, we were known and felt at home. But friends, what is home to us? What does coming home look like? Where is God in our coming home? Each one of us defines home differently, and for some of us who've lost loved ones, home may feel empty or different than home did before. I cannot imagine what the victims of the hurricanes are experiencing right now. Where is home for them? For those whose villages or small towns and livelihoods have been wiped out, where is home to them? For those who've lost their physical houses, they are homeless. For those who've lost loved ones and family, the despair of not having a home feel complete could be totally overwhelming. Overwhelming. In Basel, Germany, at the train station, we needed to find the train to Zurich, Switzerland. We had our ticket, but the platforms and the announcements about the incoming trains were all spoken or printed in German, and they were speaking very fast. We understood a few words of German, and we made our way to the correct platform. But how did you know when the train pulled up if it was the right train to get on or not? We had no idea. And as there's no announcements, you can't tell. There's nothing that said Zurich on it. So I asked for help. I struck up a conversation with a 30-year-old something German woman who was traveling to Zurich to attend a reunion with her classmates. She was willing to help us and even to guide us onto the train, to sit with us, and then at the end, guide us in Zurich to the taxi platform, which is lovely. But while we were on this 1-hour train ride, she and I shared an experience. She wanted to talk about her home. She told us all about what it was like to work and live in Germany, what it was like to find affordable housing, to find a job, to secure doctor's appointments months and months and months out. She wanted to share her experience with the educational system and her ability to get low-cost education. She shared about her home village, where she and her family all lived, the village of their birth. This was common, she said. People did not venture far from home. She asked me specific questions about the U.S.A. as home, and she wanted to know, very specifically, why do so many Americans leave home and go other places after college? Why do they leave their parents and family behind, she asked. What is this being independent, she wanted to know. Being independent and being on your own without family nearby was a totally foreign concept to her. And she was so smart. This being independent thing just wasn't working for her in her mind. She was a social worker with 2 master's degrees and still working in social work, but now she was working in something called human resources as a social worker. She was helping people in the workplace find satisfaction in their jobs and then health in their body and mind. It was fascinating to me. And her mind and body were whole because she was in the village of her birth and had family all around her. That was her culture. The conversation then moved to religion. And she brought that up, not me. And why she and her friends, family, neighbors, and colleagues had all left the church. All of them had left the church. The church of hypocrisy, she called it, where they say they will do one thing and then they do another. And mostly, she said, the church hurts people. It was really hard to hear that, of a young person so far away. And she was referring to the sexual misconduct and abuse cases that had come out in the Catholic Church in that time. And she wanted to know what organized denominational religion looked like in the U.S. And we talked about it. We shared what each of our homelands thought about organized religion and why so many were walking away. And she said home and God now was an individual thing, she said. God was no longer sought out in community. And while I really understood her rationale, I really did, I could feel God weeping. Because you see, while being close to God individually is wonderful, God does want us to connect with each other in community, with Him as well. And I'm certain of that. The prodigal son returned home when he realized he was suffering, had made a mistake, was willing and able to accept a different kind of home life. When he begged his father for forgiveness, he was accepted home, foolish but beloved. In the case of the small villages in France and Germany, home appeared to be centered around family and community. And the village grocery and the pharmacy. To be known is to be loved, and to be loved is to be known. People know your name. Aren't we cute? Ralph and I were really quite ready to come back to our beloved Owens Crossroads, to our friends, to our church, but God providing the knowing. God provided a knowing while we were away, when we opened ourselves up to it. You see, friends, the knowing that God provided was this. It didn't matter how far away we traveled or how long we were gone. This wasn't important. And you want to know why? Because we learned that we carried home with us wherever we went. Wherever we went, home was with us. Why? Because God was with us. God was at the center of our individual cores, and then God was at the center of our relationship, the Ralph and Kim relationship. So wherever we landed, and with whoever we encountered along the way, home was on our backs like a turtle shell. I want you to remember that. You carry that feeling and that God with you like a turtle shell. And we could share home because God was our home. I'd like us to pray through a poem called Place by Roddy Hamilton. Place by Roddy Hamilton. It's a prayer. Loving God, may we be found and may we find a place called home, a place where faith holds us and grace renews us, where forgiveness longs for us to be who you will us to be. May we find a place called home where we're accepted as we are, where we are taken in and loved unconditionally, a place called home where we belong, and our souls fit, and our questions are allowed, and our anger is heard, and our needs are recognized, and our pain is held, and our names are known. And may this place be that place, O God. This community, this group of travelers and doubters and companions on the way, this home where your place is our place. And place isn't a building, but a way of being together in relationship, held together by love. Loving God, amen.